first wanted to start learning Hasidic Sforim, I asked my Rabbi Zatzal what I should start with, and he said you should start with the Pri Tzaddik. Pri Tzaddik is very hard. He knew the whole of the Jewish sources, and in each essay he could quote from the Gemara, from the Zohar, from the Rambam's Mor Nevuchim, from the Kuzari, from the Tur. He could quote from all over. And of course, you'd have to be familiar with the vocabulary. And one of the things he did was create a picture which spanned a number of different categories, a theme which expressed itself in a number of different ways, coming from different categories, which demonstrated a kind of unity within the tradition, which I found very fascinating and impressive. And I tried to pick up a little bit of that approach to exploring Jewish concepts. In respect to Rosh Hashanah, I'd like to share with you a number of different sources coming from different pieces of the tradition, which at the outset may seem to be completely unrelated to one another, and maybe even unrelated in general to Rosh Hashanah. And I hope to show you that they're all expressions of a single theme. Every morning, in the morning blessings, there's a paragraph Aval anachnu amcha b'nei v'risecha. Now, I don't know, my edition of Siddur here is on page 26. It's two paragraphs before the first Shema in the Siddur.
Oh, the morning blessing,
yeah. So, I don't know, in this... You have it? Yeah. Okay, the one before that. Aval anachnu. Yeah. So now, if we look at this and pay careful attention and think about it precisely, I think you can see that there's something here that needs explanation. Now, I'll read it in English, but... But we are your people, members of your covenant, children of Abraham, your beloved, to whom you swore about Moriah, the offspring of Isaac, his only son, who was bound atop the altar. Community of Jacob, your firstborn son, etc. So here you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and each one is described a particular way. If you notice, Abraham is described as your beloved, and your helpful, friendly translator here puts a capital Y, because it means you're speaking to God about them. And when you say to God, your beloved, it means he's beloved to God. And we skip a line down to Jacob, it's your firstborn son, capital Y, which means that he's God's firstborn son, whatever that means. But in the middle, you have Isaac, his only son. Who's he?
Jacob?
Isaac is his only son.
Oh.
Isaac is his. Who's the he that he's the son of?
Abraham.
Abraham. So isn't it odd that Abraham and Jacob are related to God and Isaac is related to Abraham? Isn't that odd? Especially since there is another girsa here. Some Siddurim have, instead of Yechido, his only son, they have Akedascha, your bound one, referring him back to God. And we don't have that girsa. So it isn't just a meaningless variation. Since there is another way to make it consistent, and our text of the Siddur doesn't do that, it needs some explanation why it wouldn't be consistent. Okay? That's one question. Now, here's another question. Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment, day of justice, din. You know that the patriarchs stand for different principles. Abraham is loving kindness, Isaac is justice and din, and Jacob is some kind of amalgam of the two. If Rosh Hashanah is the day of justice, so it's got to be Isaac's day. Let's take a look. Oh, I hope they have it here. I hope they have the reading for Rosh Hashanah. It's got Pesach, Shavuos, 7th, Tisha B'Av. Here we go. No. Where's? Festivals and other occasions. Oh. Hoshana, here we go. First one is on, 1234 and 1236. 1234. What do we read from the Torah on the days of Rosh Hashanah? Since remember that it's Isaac's day, so it would be quite reasonable if the Torah readings are about Isaac. Here we go. Okay. The first day of Rosh Hashanah, we read, this is the Haftorahs. Where's the Hashanah? Not the Haftorah. I want the Torah reading. Let's try this again. Tazria.
Is represented by Gevura, you said?
One second.
Okay.
Rosh Hashanah. That's the Maftir. No, it doesn't have the regular Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah? This is missing pages here. Azariah, Bereshis, okay, Bamidbar, Devarim. Oh no, Torah reading. Okay, here we go. So here we go. Rosh Hashanah. Can't read here. Yeah. Genesis chapter 21. Genesis chapter 21. So, let's see what Genesis chapter 21 has to say about Isaac.
Chapter 21, you said?
Yeah.
Verse 1.
94. 95. Hashem remembered Sarah as he had said, so did with Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son unto Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time which God had spoken. Abraham called the name of his son, was born to him. Sarah born him Isaac, Yitzchak. Abraham circumcised his son. At the age of 8 days, commanded him. And he was 100 years old. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Whoever hears that she at the age of 90 will give birth. She said, who is the one who said to Abraham, Sarah would nurse children? I've borne a son in his old age. Child grew and was weaned. Abraham made a great feast the day that he was weaned.
He's 3 years old?
Yeah.
About 3 years old.
So Sarah that Hagar was and Yishmael was mocking. And you have the whole parsha of sending away Yishmael. And then a local king came to Abraham and they made a covenant. And that's it. So where's Isaac here? Oh, Isaac was born Ah, I got it. Isaac was born. Okay, very good. So I hear about Isaac's birth. Isaac's birth from Abraham. Okay, what's chapter 22? Well, chapter 22 is the binding of Isaac, the almost sacrifice of Isaac, where God commands Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, and it's only called off at the last moment. You know, if Rosh Hashanah is Isaac's day, these passages seem to be, I know they are about Isaac. Isaac's in there all right. One is his birth, and one is where he almost gets killed. Yeah. Golly, it isn't his great accomplishments. It isn't where God speaks to him and makes promises to him. It isn't where he gives blessings to his children. Why would these be the aspects of Isaac's life that are chosen to read in Rosh Hashanah? This is the day that carries Isaac's stamp, so to speak.
Which is what again? I'm sorry. What does Isaac represent?
Strict justice.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Strict justice. That's the second question. Here's the third question. One of the themes in the prayers of Rosh Hashanah is asking God for mercy. And given the nature of the day, that could be questioned. Let me give you an example from something you should be familiar with. When a person is on trial for committing a crime, and they're presenting evidence against him, does the accused make a plea for mercy? Not really. No, because since the trial is still ongoing, he doesn't know whether he's going to be pronounced innocent or guilty. He's hoping for a decision of innocence. They're presenting a defense in his behalf. A plea for mercy is relevant after the verdict is delivered. In the meantime, the theme of the activity is justice. Let's determine what the just outcome should be. And the reason for this is fairly deep, because what is mercy? When you ask for mercy, what are you doing? You're saying, I know that I'm wrong. I know that I failed. I know that justice would dictate a certain outcome, but I'm asking that it not be done. I'm asking for leniency. Mercy is always a plea not to do what justice requires. Now, if you have a day that's dedicated to making the judgment of justice, that's not the time to make a plea that justice not be done. Now is the time when we're determining what justice requires. It seems out of place. A plea for mercy seems very relevant on Yom Kippur. The theme of Yom Kippur is cleansing the person from what he's done, rehabilitating him, repairing him. There, yes, by all means, be appropriate to ask for mercy. But on the day of judgment itself, it seems like a plea for mercy is out of court. That's a third question. A fourth question is raised by the Midrash itself. It just asks, let's suppose a person is on trial for his life, and he knows the trial is going to be on such and such a day. What do you think he'll be doing the night before? Praying, trying to hire somebody to spirit him out of the country, or bribe one of the judges, or something. Okay, the day of Rosh Hashanah is when, so to speak, the trial of the Jewish people occurs every year. What do we do the night before? We have a feast, thank you. We dress in holiday clothes, and we eat and drink fine foods, we have fine drinks, and we sing. My. Is that really in tune with the fact that tomorrow you're going to be on trial for your life? So what do we have here? We have a passage in the Siddur. We have the readings from the Torah for Rosh Hashanah. We have some of the prayers for Rosh Hashanah. And we have the custom of how Rosh Hashanah is celebrated. Now let's go back through them one by one, and I'll show you that they all express the same theme. Back to the Siddur. So we had Abraham's called your beloved. I wonder if that's really right. I must say that I think the translation should be the one who loves you, not loved by you, but okay. And Jacob is your firstborn son, and in between you have Isaac as his only son. The reasoning that's given is this. God created the world as an act of loving kindness. Loving kindness is the original principle of creation. Someone who represents loving kindness is someone who has a direct connection to the Creator because he expresses the purpose of the creation. Abraham, his whole principle is loving kindness, so he's, of course, related. Jacob combines within him, in some way, the strict justice of Isaac and the loving kindness of Abraham. So Jacob has in him an ingredient of loving kindness, and he can attach himself to God directly. But Isaac, if he's strict justice, has no inherent loving kindness. How does he get connected? He only gets connected because he is an offshoot of Abraham. Abraham's loving kindness expresses itself in Isaac's justice, and that's why Isaac is also connected. Otherwise, he couldn't be connected. To be connected means to represent the purpose of creation. Isaac only represents the purpose of creation by being an expression of Abraham, and therefore he can't be related directly to God. You have to think of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob here not just as recipients of this relationship with God, but they are the means, the medium through which that relation is being constructed with the Jewish people, their offspring. So Isaac is, in this sense, only indirect, not direct. Further confirmation for this comes from two passages about Isaac in the Torah, which are really quite remarkable. Where am I? Yeah. So if you look on page 129, chapter 26, there was a famine in the land. Aside from the first famine was the days of Abraham. Isaac went to Abimelech, king of Philistines, at Gerar. Hashem appeared to him and said, okay, this is Hashem speaking to Isaac. Do not descend to Egypt. Dwell in the land I shall indicate to you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your offspring will I give all these lands, and establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will increase your offspring like the stars of the heavens, and will give to your offspring all these lands, and all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your offspring. Wow. Look at that as a blessing of God to Isaac. Now look at the last sentence. Because, there's a because. God is promising all of this to Isaac because of something. There's something behind it that motivates it. What's that? Because Abraham obeyed my voice, observed my safeguards, my commandments, my decrees, my Torahs. You know, if I were Isaac, I think I'd be a little disappointed. What about me? Didn't I do anything good? Don't I deserve it? No. I'm giving you this blessing because of Abraham. That's quite remarkable. And it's especially remarkable because it happens again. On page 133, top of the page, verse 24, Hashem appeared to him, to Isaac, that night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Fear not, for I am with you. I will bless you and increase your offspring. Wow, that's nice. That's a nice blessing. Because, doesn't stand on its own. Because of Abraham, my servant. Isaac gets two blessings, and both of them are because of Abraham. Jacob gets blessings from God, not because of anybody else. I don't know of anywhere else in the whole Tanakh where someone gets a blessing and said, I'm giving you this blessing because of somebody else. Why is he singled out in this way? The answer is because of what I told you before. What is God going to do? Give a blessing to Isaac to strict justice? What kind of blessing would that be? What limitations would be put on it because it's only expression of strict justice? No, God says to Isaac, I'm giving you a blessing because of Abraham. The blessing is coming through Abraham to you. You don't get it straight because you have to exist as an offshoot of Abraham because you are strict justice. Okay, now let's ask about the Torah readings for Rosh Hashanah. The first Torah reading is Isaac being born from Abraham. Isn't that what we've been being told? You exist only as an offshoot of Abraham. Nothing else about his life where he's functioning independently is read. That's read. And even more dramatically on the second day, where Isaac is almost slaughtered by Abraham, where loving kindness requires to be expressed and strict justice stands in the way, strict justice is wiped aside. Part 2, Chapter 8 of The Way of God by Luzzatto. You want to look this up. So again, the theme is, yes, it may be Isaac's say, but it must be central that Isaac is a secondary effect, not primary effect. It only exists as an extension of Abraham. Okay, now let's talk about the prayers. We have petitions for mercy. We said, on a day that's dedicated to strict justice, petition for mercy is out of court. That's the time when a decision is being made as to what strict justice requires. After the decision is made, you can ask for mercy because mercy is always a plea that strict justice not be done. That would be true if there were a day which was strict justice. But there can't be such a day. There can't be such a day because everything is traced back to loving kindness. Loving kindness is the one and only purpose for the creation of the world. Anything else that exists because it expresses loving kindness or serves loving kindness. It can't exist on its own. If somebody says, this day is dedicated to strict justice, I have to think, really? No. Strict justice is the vice president, not the president. So it couldn't be a day of strict justice alone. The vice president exists only to carry out the policy of the president. So when strict justice is operating, I know very well that loving kindness is also operating. Nothing can operate without loving kindness. Nothing. So when on the day of strict justice we appeal for mercy, what we're really doing is appealing over the head of the vice president to the president. That's always relevant. The president is in charge of everything that's done. And finally, the way Rosh Hashanah is experienced, the relationship that God has to the world on Rosh Hashanah is that of Melech, king. king is the one who dispenses justice. But as we have said on prior occasions, when we talk about God as king, almost always we call him Avinu Malkeinu, our father, our king. And father always comes first. It's never reversed. That means that he's a father acting as king. It's not even as if he's father, comma, and king, and maybe Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays father, and Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays king, and Shabbos takes a rest. No. He's father, period. And sometimes the father takes on the functional role of king because what the father wants for the children needs that role. So no, the night of Rosh Hashanah, what are we experiencing? Tomorrow is the day of the judgment. But my father is the judge. And I know it's not going to be vengeance, and it's not going to be cold and so-called objective. You know that in statuary, justice is usually figured as a person with a blindfold, which means the justice dispenses according to the law, and the law is blindfolded. It makes no difference who you are. Everyone gets the same justice. That's not our view. That would be a view if justice stood on its own. But since justice is loving kindness, since it's a father judging his children, it's not going to be blind. The relationship of father to the child, the hopes, the purposes for which the father's raising, all of that's going to go into the judgment. Won't be pure justice in that way. So at nighttime, we express our confidence that we're going before our Father, who loves us and wants the best for us. That's why we can have a semi-relaxed meal, and we can have songs. We can have we enjoy a banquet, because we're not going against a judge who's vengeful or who's got his own political and economic policies in mind and has no care for me as a person. No, that's not the kind of judgment that's being made. That explains why you can have this double experience on Rosh Hashanah. Yeah.
I was going to. Are you implying then, of course, the holy judgment realm, not the court realm, like of man, that justice, judgment, din without chesed is not true din. Without mercy, without an attribute of mercy, is not really true.
Well, okay,
really true.
The words that you say, I think, have a true interpretation, but they might be misleading. Okay. What I want to say is that a pursuit of justice detached from loving kindness is not the way God runs the world, and not the way he wants it run. So you could possibly have a definition of justice which was detached. That's what I was indicating, that in secular justice, the ideal is that it should be detached. That's why it's blindfolded. It has no connection to it. And I wouldn't say that their definition and what they do isn't just, but it isn't the way justice is supposed to function in a larger context. From our point of view, there's a larger context. By the way, they do have this feature built in because judges have a certain leeway in assigning verdicts. They can assign how many years in prison and whether it's eligible for parole, things like that, in many cases, because the judge takes into account more than just what the law requires. So there is that sense that the law isn't operating in a vacuum. In our case, it's much bigger than that. So I think the idea is that a justice which wasn't under the control of loving kindness would not be the kind of justice that God wants to run the world. And it's not the kind of justice that he uses in running the world. And that's why it's Avinu Malkeinu. Okay, that's the first set of ideas that I wanted to share with you. Now, about 40 years ago, approximately, I came here 42 years ago, the person who ran this program was Rabbi Yirmiyahu Abramoff, and he lives in Har Nof, and used to speak Friday nights in the synagogue where I daven. And I think it was the Shabbat before Rosh Hashanah, he made the following observation. The days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur are called Aseres Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of Tshuva. Now, the definition of Tshuva has, let's say in the Rambam, has 3 separate components. Tshuva requires regretting what you've done in the past, resolving to change your behavior in the future, and confession, vidui. You need all three. If you do 2 out of the 3, you have not done tshuva. Right? Resolve, regret the past, resolve for the future, and confession.
So they say forgiveness, sometimes getting forgiveness is part of it, or that's like an additional part?
Well, tshuva is what I do, and forgiveness is what God provides. So I'm talking now about my responsibility. What does my performance consist of? It consists of those 3 things. Now, almost all Jews on Rosh Hashanah do not recite vidui, confession. There are some who follow the custom of the Arizal and recite it during the blowing of the shofar silently. It could be. But almost none do. So if tshuva requires confession and you don't take confession on Rosh Hashanah, that's 2 out of the 10 in which you're not doing tshuva. I don't think that Shabbos Shuvah, I don't think anybody recites vidui on Shabbos Shuvah. So that's 3. 3 out of the 10 days are days in which you cannot do tshuva. So why is it called the 10 days of tshuva? I heard that and I thought, that's a very good question. That's a question. Things have to make sense. They have to be precise. Now, I confess I do not remember the answer that he gave. I thought about it for a while, and I came up with a different answer of my own. And that is, it's not the 10 days of doing tshuva, it's the 10 days of being in the state of tshuva. What happens to a person is this. He does tshuva, and he changes himself as a person. His priorities are different. His strategies for life are different. He says, confession, according to the strict definition of tshuva, say it for confession once, and you've done it. The mitzvah has been done, but part of the mitzvah is changing your orientation, changing your priorities, your commitments. You might lose that. So the phraseology that's used is, do tshuva, and if you remain in the state of tshuva, omeid b'tshuvaso, until he dies. That's the way it's described. So the doing is a one-time performance, and then there's maintaining the change in you that doing engineered, maintaining it. So I think the one way to answer his question is, when it says tshuva, it doesn't mean 10 days on which every day you do the performance of tshuva. 10 days of tshuva means that you do the performance of tshuva whenever you do it, and in the 10 days of tshuva, you are in the state of tshuva. The changes you made in yourself due to the performance of tshuva are maintained throughout the 10 days. Now, if that answer is right, that means that you have to do tshuva before the 10 days. Because you can't do the tshuva on Rosh Hashanah. So you got to do it beforehand. And if that's right, it helps to explain something else. What the shofar does in Rosh Hashanah is a subject of a large literature. One idea that's very well known is that both the shofar and the Creator, who's sitting on the throne of strict justice, moves over to the throne of mercy. Blowing of the shofar has that effect. By the way, there's another source, I'm just saying this for those who know some things, where it says that he's sitting on the throne of justice, blow the shofar, and he gets up off the throne of justice and transforms evil into good. There is no throne of mercy. That's it's a midrash. It's a very strikingly different picture. But at any rate, blowing the shofar, the job is to vacate the throne of justice and perhaps sit down on the throne of mercy. The literature that describes this always puts in a footnote, with tshuva. This is not magic. Smoke signals, snake oil, this is not magic. Blowing a tune on a horn, and therefore you get mercy? No. The notes that you blow in the shofar have to be an expression of the fact that you're a different person. You're standing in a different position. You must have tshuva to use to accompany with the blowing of the shofar. Okay, now this makes Rabbi Abramov's question even more dramatic. Really? But how can I do that? If I can't do tshuva on Rosh Hashanah, how can I fulfill this requirement that the sounds of the shofar be accompanied with tshuva? And the answer has to be because you did tshuva before. Tshuva, including vidui, including confession, you did before. And now, the tshuva that you're accompanying the shofar with is your state of being in tshuva. So now that also becomes explained. And I think in modern practice, I don't know how far back this goes, the Rambam did not have it, but in modern practice, we say slichos, so we don't start saying slichos after Rosh Hashanah, we start saying slichos before Rosh Hashanah. If you have the great fortune of being part of the tradition of Eidot HaMizrach, then you say it the whole month of Elul. And if you are a poor, impoverished Ashkenazi, you say it for a week, or maybe a couple of more days, depending upon when Rosh Hashanah is. But everybody says slichos before Rosh Hashanah. The point of that is, I think, slichos are an expression of doing tshuva. You recite the 13 attributes of mercy. You recite the confession in the slichos. There's the opportunity to do tshuva before Rosh Hashanah comes. So when you walk into Rosh Hashanah, you're carrying the tshuva with you. Yeah.
So what part of the saying the 13 attributes mentioned in the Torah, how does that do tshuva? How is that doing tshuva?
So I wouldn't say, that's a good question, the 13 attributes of mercy. The Rambam distinguishes between what you do when you do tshuva, on the one hand, and the behaviors associated with doing tshuva, but aren't, strictly speaking, an expression of the institution. And one of the behaviors associated with the institution is pleading with God for mercy. And the recital of the 13 attributes of mercy is to plead with God for mercy. That's why he's saying the 13 attributes of mercy. That's the idea. So that's the kind of thing that about tshuva does. He pleads with God for mercy because he knows that, according to strict justice, certain things should happen to him, which he would prefer not to have happen to him. And that means that the strict attribute of justice has to be modified. And that he has to plead for that. Let me add, since you asked the question, let me add in just a little more background here. When I first moved to Baltimore in 1969, because I'm very old. Before that, in the Neresfeld Yeshiva in Baltimore, the mashgiach named Rabbi Dovid Kronglass was there. I didn't meet him, but I think he was already nifter by the time I got there. But I heard a tape of his, and he contrasted loving kindness with mercy in a very profound way. I've repeated this at least 200 times. He said, the very essence of mercy is to modify justice. Mercy is a response to justice. Justice says X, Y, Z should happen, and mercy says, please don't. Give another chance, modify it, reduce it, give him some assistance in standing up to it. Don't just carry out strict justice. And because mercy is a plea to modify strict justice, it has two weaknesses. One weakness that it has is there must be a reason. When a plea comes to modify strict justice, guess who's on the other side? Strict justice says, why? What are you talking about? I am a genuine characteristic of the Creator, and this is my deliverance, carried out 100%. The plea for mercy has to answer that challenge and say, yes, okay, that's true, what strict justice says, and what strict justice is itself a genuine characteristic of Kadosh Baruch Hu's providence, but what? But there are reasons why it should be modified. That's one weakness. And the other weakness is that there's a limit to how much mercy can do. We have a rule, ein midas adin loka, that the characteristic of strict justice can't be just wiped away. It must get its due. So the plea for mercy can't be just ignore justice. That's not what the plea can accomplish. I'll give you an example of this. The Rambam says that there are certain transgressions. He's quoting a Mishnah, actually, from Yuma. There are certain transgressions which, in order for the person to be completely cleansed, require suffering. There are 4 categories. This is the third out of 4 categories. That's the rule. Somebody says, yeah, but please don't do it. It's not going to work because the suffering is necessary. But, says the Ramchal, Mesilas Yesharim, it could be that since part of the performance of tshuva is regretting the past, and regret is painful, I wish I hadn't done that. Every time I think about the fact that I did it, I cringe. I wish I hadn't done that. That is a painful experience. And part of tshuva is dwelling on it. It could be that the pain of regret, which is part of the tshuva, is enough. It's enough to satisfy that requirement for the pain of the kapara, of the rehabilitation, the atonement, the cleansing, and should be enough. But just wiping it away, you can't do, because God runs the world with both of these characteristics. The only time when justice is set aside is when justice would require the destruction of the world. And again, this is part 2, chapter 8, in the Way of God by Lusato. Okay, so that's the idea of the plea for mercy, and that's, and as you asked, that's part of what a Baal Tshuva does. One of the things a Baal Tshuva does is to plea for mercy, but that's not part of the tshuva itself. It's the kind of thing that is natural for a person to do if he has, there was someone in the Gemara, a great scholar named Elisha ben Avua, and at a certain point in his life he lost his focus and went off to other things. And his Acher is called Acher. His great Talmud, his great disciple was Rabbi Meir, and he never did tshuva. Rabbi Meir pleaded with him, and he said, I heard a voice from behind the curtain that hides heaven, which says, Shuvu banim, return my children, chutz me Acher, for everyone except Acher. He's rejected. That's what he heard. He's rejected. It wasn't true. It wasn't true. It was just a test. It was just a test. He should have said, that voice from heaven can't be right. There's got to be a distortion in it. It's not true. If you think that's bold, let me give you another example. Isaiah said to Chizkiyahu, the king, that because of something that he had done, he's going to die. Chizkiyahu turned his face to the wall and prayed. Isaiah said, you're going to die. What are you praying for? He said, I have a tradition from my ancestor, King David, that God is always open to prayer. The prophet just told you you're going to die. Says Chizkiyahu, that can't be right. It can't be right. There's no such thing as such an absolute pronouncement that you're going to die. It has to be that there's a way out. And he lived another 22 years, if I remember correctly. So these things that are reported have to be understood in context and understood in terms of the rest of the information that you have. Similarly, there was the discussion in the Sanhedrin about a certain law. They were discussing and debating it, and it broke up into 2 camps opposed to one another, very lopsided. One camp was just Rabbi Eliezer, the other camp was all the rest of the 70. It was 70-1. And a voice from heaven, there was a bunch of challenges. At the end was the voice from heaven proclaimed, Rabbi Eliezer is right. And the Sanhedrin voted him down. And the Gemara concludes that it says, Nitzchuni banai, God laughed and said, my children have defeated me. How did they vote him down? A voice from heaven said he's right. How did they vote him down? Because Rabbi Yeshua said, the Torah is not in heaven. You'll say, what a chutzpah. The voice of heaven proclaims, and Rabbi Yeshua says the voice of the Torah is not in heaven, but those words, the Torah is not in heaven, are in the book of Deuteronomy, which God wrote. Hello! That's God's own statement on record. So that means that the voice which said Rabbi Eliezer is right was only meant to test them. will you live up to what I wrote in Deuteronomy, the Torah's not in heaven, or not? Somebody says, but God spoke to us and said, yeah, he did. He spoke to you, and what did he want? He wanted you to vote against it anyway. So this was the terrible mistake that Acher made. But what you see is that the plea for mercy has an uphill battle. I told you about Menashe, where the angel said that they blocked all the roads to heaven because they said his crimes were too great. There's definitely an uphill battle. The uphill battle can be won in partial terms, but one should be conscious, like what Rav Kronglass said, that it really is an uphill battle. Mercy is a tremendous... Oh, okay, so the final thing that he said is to contrast that with loving kindness. Mercy is reactive. It's a reaction to justice. Loving kindness is a reaction to anything. Loving kindness is an original principle. God creates the world so there'll be recipients of the kindness that he wants to give. If you're talking about creating the world when there's nothing behind it, nothing else that justifies it. You know, the alternative is nothing, just emptiness. This has to come from a principle that starts the process going rather than being a response to something prior. And so even though intuitively loving kindness on the one hand and mercy on the other hand are expressions of support and help and identification, but they're very different in their structure. Loving kindness can be the source of creation, mercy cannot. Because mercy always comes after there's a creation, and after there's a performance, and after there's a judgment that there's a failure, and after a proclamation of the penalty, then mercy comes in. You can't start with that. This is a fundamental Jewish idea. What are starting points and what are reactive points? Yes is a reaction. You can't start a speech with yes, because the word yes by itself means nothing. Yes is yes, what you said. I agree with what you said. It's always a reaction. So is no. No is also a reaction to something that was said prior. I know it's literary technique to start with yes because you don't know what he's talking about, and then chapter 3 you'll figure out what it was. But it's mysterious precisely because yes has to be a response. If you had a person that hands in a composition, 2 is the most important number in the world. Okay. He said something. You'd like him to write 1,000 words, but he said something. But if he hands a piece of paper which says yes, he said nothing. Nothing at all. Because yes is a reaction to something else. You have in Kabbalah or and Kli. Or shines. Kli restricts the shining of the light. It only functions if there's light shining, and this restricts it. You know, what would a blindfold do in a totally black room? The same wearing it or not wearing it. The function of a blindfold is to cut out light. There's no light there, then there's nothing to cut out. So a blindfold is a response to something else. Light isn't a response to something else. Light just lights things up. So anyway, this is the idea here that mercy is a responding characteristic, and loving kindness is an original characteristic. That's part of what he said. I thought that was very profound. Okay, so that's a little bit of preparation for Rosh Hashanah.
That's why Rosh Hashanah precedes Yom Kippur, even though Rosh Hashanah is the Day of Judgment and Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. That's why Rosh Hashanah precedes Yom Kippur.
Oh, that's interesting.
I didn't get an answer from another rabbi why.
Oh, I have a couple of answers for that, but let me think about that for a second.
You mentioned why.
Maybe that's an interesting point.
We're coming kind
The
of
day of tshuva is obviously a response. It's a response to failure.
Yeah. But it still precedes Yom Kippur.
Yeah, I think that's a nice thought. It's a nice thought. Rabbi Sosalanter, I think, asked this question. Wouldn't it be better to do tshuva first and then come to the Day of Judgment clean?
Yeah.
So one is that tshuva itself is a response to the fact that of failure and judgment. But I have another answer. Because Rosh Hashanah is the Coronation Day. We declare God King of the universe. And God is showing us how much He's invested in us, that He's willing to have us place the crown on his head, so to speak, before we've been through Yom Kippur and received atonement for our transgressions. With your stained garments, I want you to put the crown on my head. I think that's a very profound vote of confidence. Yeah.
I like that a lot. Something else that just kind of struck me. I was wondering this question before you asked, like this whole thing of the ordering. By Rosh Hashanah, you have the din come in, and really, ideally, you should have always lived by din to begin with. And when you do sort of your judgment and atonement, the gulf, it was that intermediate time when your Rebbe told you have to be perfect, that time in between sort of Rosh Hashanah. So now you've tried to return yourself to the standard you've always supposed to live by, and that is a kind of a period in which you try to actually live out that standard in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And so you crown him, but you also resolve and have this intermediate time to see if you can really fit into the proper identity which you were always supposed to have. And then Yom Kippur is the day when I think you've kind of proven yourself out, and so you're really deserving of the atonement.
I think that's very good. By the way, it's not in between. It's the 10 days of Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, the whole thing. People do talk about Bain, but they misunderstand it. But I think that sounds to me very good. I think that's a further expression of what my Rabbi was talking about when he said that. You're demonstrating that you're living up to the original intention of the creation. Because the original intention was din, it was modified afterwards. I think it's a very good thought. A very good thought. Very good. Okay.